Hello and welcome to BusyWorksBeats.com. Today we continue the FL Studio series right here at BusyWorksBeats.com/FL Studio. This is part 4 of a 4-part series on how to make beats in FL Studio. So I know we're using stock sounds and I know I could use the hardest drums in the world, but I really wanted to step into your shoes to say, what would it be like if I had to start all the way over from scratch? If I had nothing on my computer, no downloads, no extra murder beats kits, no nothing. How would I do this? And this is what I'm showing you, and I'm showing you the true limitations of it as well. So I just want you to know that you can get it kind of a pro sound sometimes, but in other categories, it's not really a pro sound. But I'll show you how to mix all this stuff in this video. This is part 4 of the mixing video on how to make all this stuff sound at least decent, okay? And so that's what we're doing today. So if you missed part 1 through 3, I highly recommend going all the way back because this is not for beat. This part specifically is a little more dense because it requires a whole different skill set called mixing. And again, I'm going to make it as simple as possible. However, this takes a lot of practice. Okay. It's like video editing. You know, you can record just a guy jumping around in front of a green screen. Video editing is making it look like he's on the side of a Titanic ready to jump off. Like that's the difference of what we're talking about. Okay, so now that we have all the sounds, the first step is I'm gonna turn my mic off for a second. Actually, no, I'm not. I'll just turn my headphones. I'm trying to think of a way to do this. Yeah, never mind. What you wanna do is turn your headphones up and then go to your mixer, which is this icon, and then start turning stuff down that hurts your ears. That's all you gotta do. Turn your headphones up and then start turning stuff down. So this is called leveling. All right, so now that we have everything leveled properly, now we can move forward. So that's the first step a lot of people forget. They just slam everything into the top and they wonder why their beats don't sound right. Also, a quicker, I'm trying to think of a fast way to describe this. So what we're gonna do is hit Control, left click and highlight all these sounds. So literally every sound in your beat, we're gonna highlight, hit Control, left click and drag. We're going to go to like an open mixer channel. Let's just go to 10 to make it an even number and right click and route to this track only. So now all these sounds will go directly to this track and let's call this the mix bus. In short, this is everything combined in the beat. So we can see it as what it is. So right now the levels are pretty hot. So we need to turn them down. So you could either go here and turn everything down all at once, or you can go inside the mix bus and then open up a volume control and then turn it down. What I'm going to do is just highlight all the sounds, just hit Control, highlight all the sounds again, and just left click and pull them down. So let me show you an example. So if I turn them up, we're in the red. Well, hopefully that didn't mess up the video or anybody's speaker. You see how we're in like the yellowish red area? Let's pull that down until we're in about the green yellow area. So you're like, why would I ever turn my beat down like that? It's so you can have room for effects. So we're hitting at about -9. If you need a number on the dB scale, we're at about -9. Okay, so there's no hard rule for this. Some people do it at -12. Some people do it at -10. Some people do it at -6. There's no hard rule. My proposition to you, or my advice, I guess, is to keep it somewhere between -6 and -12. That's just the sweet zone. Okay. So now we have our beat levels low. We can now start adding effects. So I'm going to turn this up just for the video's sake because I don't want you to be confused here. Because I want you to be able to hear the sounds. That's the only caveat, as I'm doing this for the video, not for the actual mixing. So we need to go through each sound and then figure out what we need to do to the sound to make it blend better. So I'm going to listen to all the sounds and say what needs to be blended better. I think the bass could be more present. Okay, so we're going to open up what's called an EQ so that we can start reshaping the tone of this bass. So let's add a fruity parametric EQ2. And let's pull up this blue band here, which is going to pull up all the higher frequencies of our bass. And let's pull down the frequency knob. Now this sound doesn't really have a lot of high frequencies in it to begin with because we filtered them out in part 2. So there's not much high frequency to really deal with. So I'm just pulling it up. It's very subtle. You can not hear it. You basically can't hear it. It's just so we have information going on in the high end so the bass doesn't feel so squashed in that low end. Now we're going to go into the parametric EQ2 and pull down somewhere around 200 hertz. And I'm using my mouse scroll to make this wider or more narrow. We're going to make it a narrow cut at around 250 hertz. It just gets rid of some of that muddy clutter. I know this EQ curve looks ridiculous. That's why I said mixing is a whole thing. Now we're going to add, I'm trying to think, a visual compressor will be Fruity Limiter. Let's add this compressor. Let's go to compressor mode. Let's pull down the threshold. And we may be able to, let's pull also down the saturation knob, turn up the gain a little bit. It just adds like a little edge to the sound. So here's what I did. I know we're moving a little bit quicker. That's why I said this is kind of a whole different artwork. You can use your mouse scroll to move stuff up or down. What I did was I put the Fruity Limiter before the Fruity Parametric EQ2. So now we have higher frequencies to actually go through that EQ curve. So now we can hear that saturation that we're adding. Just gonna pull it back a little bit. It's a little too aggressive. So it's very subtle. If you can't hear it, no worries. It's just to beef up the sound. Let's pull this down just a little bit. So now let's go to our mixer channel 2. Let's go to our melody. Let's add an EQ. So we're pulling up what's called the presence of the sound. So it can cut through the mix a little bit more. Keep in mind a vocal needs to be added to this track as well. So at about 350, 400, it needs a cut because it's very blurry. So we're just gonna cut it, but again, use your mouse wheel to make that a smaller range so it doesn't cut all the sound. Let's go back to Fruity Limiter on the first track and let's start setting up the compressor. Let's pull down the threshold to about -16 or so. Turn the ratio to 2:1. If you don't know what I'm talking about, read the values in the top left. So this will soften the bass a little bit more. I think that's input gain. We need an output gain knob. So instead of using that, let's go to parametric EQ2, which is under the Fruity Limiter. Let's pull up this where it says main level. Let's pull that up. This is turning the bass up. I feel like the bass can be 1 octave lower. So let's hit control down on the bass. There we go. So now we have a new octave. We might have to move that resonance point. So I'm going to listen over my speakers so I can actually hear. Okay. So one thing I like to mix into is a saturator. Now again, FL doesn't come with every single thing we need. So I'm gonna run this stuff through, we could do a Fruity Wave Shaper. Okay, let's use this one. And all I'm gonna do is just pull this a little pull it up. So it's making the sound a little bit crunchier. The further you pull this up, it just adds density to the track. But it also it enhances that blurriness. So we're just gonna pull it down a little bit with the mix level. Okay, so there's still a lot of work to do, a lot of blur left. So when you're mixing, you want to hear all the sounds at once. Let's work on this melody. I think I could use more reverb, so I'm just turning up the wet level on the reverb. And let's open up the high cut. So let's more high frequencies through the reverb. Let's go to parametric EQ2. We have that on. All right. Trying to hear that snare. Just gonna pitch the snare down. If you want the snare to go harder, you just crank up the volume, go back to your snare, go to the sampler, go to the pre-computed effects and just crank it up. Because remember, we have it going through a soft clipper. It just makes it more like scrapey sounding. I think you're hearing my echo, so let me turn myself off. It's hard to mix and talk at the same time, so because you're hearing the echoes from my headphones. So what I'm gonna do is add an EQ to the snare. So just add a little high end, boost it right here. Okay, so we just have to keep asking where's the blurriness coming from? And a lot of the blurriness is coming from that bass. And then we have to ask, is it coming from the chorus or the EQ? So it's this first EQ that's causing a lot of blur. It's because we're boosting so heavily right at that resonance point. But that's what creates the tone. So it's like a catch-22. So we need to figure out how to get that under control. So I'm gonna pull the EQ before the compressor just so we get that. Again, there's a lot of knowledge behind this. I'm trying to skip over it. So the compressors enhance things. So we're using the EQ before the compressor so that it enhances our correction of the sound as opposed to after the fact. So this should fix it. I have to hear it over my speakers, so give me one moment. All right, so I was trying to find out where the blurriness was coming from, and a lot of it is coming from this wave shaper. So I'm gonna avoid that for now because it makes it sound muddy the way we had it. See if I turn it up. It just kind of dirties up stuff. So different saturators do different things. We could use that on a different track. So now that we have everything back to like its cleanliness sound, let's go back to this kick. Let's add a parametric EQ too. Let's boost in a wide curve. Let's boost at around 60 hertz. It's gonna give that kick of the thump we need. Sorry, I know you're hearing the echo, so let me turn off my mic. Told you this was a lot of work. Now let's go to our snare and let's continue to shape it with the EQ until it fits into this track. It's a little too bright, so it just stands out. All right, so I know I'm making all these little touches, but it's more sound design than it is mixing. So we're just reshaping tones so that they fit into the whole thing. Consider an EQ like a color balance. Like if you're on Photoshop and there's too much red, you want to turn the red down so it fits in with the blues. That's basically what an EQ is. We're just moving the colors around so it doesn't look like too much red. So at this point, we're just gonna go to the mix bus, and I'm just gonna show you different chains you could use. There's no right or wrong chain, especially with stock plugins. And so again, I'm gonna move a little bit quicker here. To add a little harmonic content with this blood overdrive. Let's go into a compressor through Fruity Limiter. Put it on compressor mode. Pull it down to about negative, probably like right here, negative 16. Let's go to 4:1 ratio. In the top left, you can read these values. Now the attack time, I like it set to 30 milliseconds, so just keep pulling this up until you read 30. Release time, I like it at 100 milliseconds for my beats. Now again, I don't use this specific plugin, but I'm just showing you what I like my settings at. Then you could lower your saturation knob if you like this saturation. It might actually sound better than this blood overdrive. Let's try it out. So to turn it on, you just click the saturation knob, you pull it to the left, and then mess with your gain knob, and you can start to hear saturation. Yeah, I like the saturation a lot better. It's just cleaner and it feels better. how the beat kind of feels together and more tight once you add that compression and saturation. Now let's add a general EQ for everything. Let's add a parametric EQ too. And then usually, you're doing little subtle touches here. You're not going crazy. So we're just reshaping the energy. Okay, so now I'm looking at my chains to kind of mirror it. Let's add a filter. So we're adding another parametric EQ too. You don't have to do this, but there's a preset called 20 hertz, 18 kilohertz cut. Or you could just do the 40 hertz cut and just move this frequency down to about 20 hertz or 30 hertz. Next step is optional. Let's add a fruity, where's it at? Fruity limiter. And basically this step is a saturator. So I'm gonna see if this works on our signal here. No, it's not. I like the tone of the saturator, but the only way I can figure out how to work it that way is if we push the gain, which is not what I'm trying to do. So I'm trying to think of an alternative plug-in. We're gonna skip that step for now, which is just adding more harmonic content. Next one is this EQ, then we have a compressor. Let's add a compressor again. Let's do fruity limiter, because you can do limiting or compression. Let's go to compressor mode. It's gonna do a very light compression. So if you have trouble hearing compression, just pull down your threshold and you'll hear the volume dip. At this point, we're going to do imaging, but there's no really default FL Studio imaging plugin that I like. That I think of, so we're not going to mess with the imaging. And at this point, you're just going to make it louder. Some people use Maximus, some people use Fruity Limiter. There's no right or wrong one, but here's where you would add your kind of loudness factor, which is usually a limiter. You just push your gain knob up. And these are all stock sounds. So that's why I said, if you want a professional sound, it's a lot easier if you just have the right sounds. Pushing these stock sounds to sound even close to good sounds is just, it takes time. But I didn't want to give you no hope. So in the next series, maybe I'll use easier sounds to work with. But this kick is conflicting with this bass as well, which creates another convoluted issue, which I don't have time to explain. So it's turning up the levels that I think need more attention. Making those adjustments in the pitch so it all fits. And again, everything's not going to play all the time. The bass is tricky because it has stereo properties that are affecting the whole perception of the sound. So again, I don't want to go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. Mixing is a long process to learn. You know, we can make it more simple if you just pick good sounds. Like these sounds just aren't good for what we're trying to create. So I just wanted to show you there's a lot of work when you don't have the right sounds. Hopefully you can understand the pain we have to go through to get these stock sounds to sound good. That's why I don't do a lot of videos on stock sounds. So hopefully you understand why by now. Okay, so that is how you put all those sounds together. We're gonna wrap this up. I'll give you the project files if you want to mess with some of this stuff. It's Game from busyworksbeats.com. If you want to learn more, go to busyworksbeats.com/FL Studio. Peace.